يعني هسه اي زول فينا بيفتكر انه هو كويس. اذا ما مشكلتنا اتجسمت قدامنا ما بنقدر نكون جادين في حلها. يعني قبيل الاخ عبد الله قال انه اي زول فينا بيفتكر المشكله هي برا منه. يعني مشكله الحكم، إذا مثلا نزل سنو كثير والشوارع اتقفلت والحركة بقت سيئة يفتكر البلدية هي السبب، في حين أنه أي واحد فينا عنده دور لو قام به ممكن كان الحال يكون أصلح. فالموضوع التطور أنا هنا داير أسير تساؤلات. يعني مثلا نحن دائما كنا نرفع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كنموذج إنساني. الناس بتعرف في السيرة أنه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو صغير شق صدره حسيا وغسل وهو رضيع ولقدام وهو في عمر السادسة أو كده. فالناس ممكن تتساءل ليه؟ الناس بتتساءل ليه مثلا حصل شق الصدر؟ أو يقول مثلا ليغفر لك الله ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر. ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر. احنا التطور إثباته مش بيكون في أنعاين لأنه شكلنا مثلا ما بيشبه الحيوانات اللي كانت جينا منها أو اخترنا منها. التطور بننظر له في السلوك، البيهيفير بتاعنا نحن لما ما يكون إنساني. يعني مثلا كل الناس هنا تذكر الحادثة بتاعت الجري هاوند بس اللي كان في سفرية من إدمنتون لوينيبيغ، وفي براندون ركب، أو قبل براندون ركب شخص وبدون أي سبب طلع سكين ضخمة جدا وبدأ يطعن الشاب اللي جنبه بدون سابق معرفة بدون أي شيء. طعنه حوالي 50 طعن، وبعد ذاك لما الناس فرت وقف البص قطع راسه. فيتخيل انه ده ما ممكن يكون سلوك انساني. بنشوف نحن في حالتنا، يعني الواحد بيكون لابس ونظيف، لكن اذا اتعديت عليه وفجرته يعني عفصت على رجله او بيظهر فيه الحيوان. فالتطور ممكن دليله نشوفه في سلوكنا. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لما حصل له الحفظ وحصل له شق الصدر، عشان كده كان دائما هو نموذج، ونحن بنحب دائما نرفعه كإنسان الواحد يتطلع له. الديمقراطية الاشتراكية ما بتعاش أو ما بتطبق عينين إلا إذا تعاشت عند كل واحد منا، وده بيكون بسبيل الطريقة النموذج. بخلي أنا عبد الله يرنس يتكلم لنا بما جاء عن الايفوليوشن. ختام الكلام، ختام الحفل بتاعنا بتكون آمنة حتقرا لنا خلق الجمال اللي هو الأستاذ محمود كان بينادي بأنه عالم بتاع أحرار ما فيه لا غل لا بغضاء كده. أدي الأخ عبد الله يرنس.
Okay. I don't know about speaking about evolution in a room where there's geologists and other scientists. That's a little scary. My training is really in linguistics and multicultural studies and history. But studying under Ustaz Mahmoud and reading his books, there's some things that he said to me and he wrote in his books that stick with you, and maybe can talk about that. One day he gave me a book to read, It was the book Dune, that trilogy. And I was so excited. He gave me this book, and I knew there was some deep spiritual understanding there. So I went and I read that book in a very short period of time, so I could go back to Ustaz Mahmoud and discuss it with him. So after some time I finished it, I went to him, we met, we were alone in his oda, in his room, and I told him I had finished reading the book, and he said, "Oh, that's fine, did you enjoy it?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what did you think of it?" He said, "Oh, I haven't read it." And so I said, "You haven't read it?" He said, no, it was given to me as a gift, and I thought it would be a good thing for you to read. He said, "I really don't find that I have enough time to read good books. I only have enough time to read great books." And he said that the measure that he uses, if he picks up something to read and the person is not clear on whether or not human beings have free will, or that God is determining what we do, he says he doesn't read a person that's not clear on that because he doesn't feel there's much to learn from it. And when I read his books, he talks about one of the problems with Western philosophy is that people in the West think that free will is something that does exist in an absolute sense in human beings, or exists to a predominant sense in human beings. And it's very interesting that the West has progressed so far under the illusion of free will. But my understanding from what Ustaz Mahmoud was telling us is that human beings evolved based on their will to be free. And he distinguished that from animals who he said evolved based on their will to live. And he says the human being's morality developed over time from lower forms, trying to reconcile and balance our will to live and those basic desires with our will to be free. And we learned that in order to be free as humans, we had to repress some of our basic urges and desires of our animal nature. And he develops that into a complete frame of thought that goes into how we evolved over time as we descended from Jinnah or paradise to the earth. And we started out as hydrogen, and that hydrogen mixes with oxygen and forms water. And he moves through that water and the dust and the earth and bacteria and amoebas, and then he starts talking about how life comes out of that mud, and he walks through the early evolutionary theory. And so Ustaz Mahmoud, in his very comprehensive view of existence, integrates religion with evolution. He didn't see the two things as being contradictory with one another. He thought of them as being complementary, and he comes from the kind of thinking of Thomas Aquinas that science properly understood and religion properly practiced are not in contradiction with one another. So Ustaz's understanding of the nature of existence led him to talk about how our species evolved by repressing our urges, and that we evolved as earlier species in a very violent environment. And so that human beings have learned fear at many different levels. We have the fear of our inherited animal existence within us. We have the fear of the human evolutionary process from the time humans separate from animals within us. We have all of the fears that we inherited from those who gave birth to us, and we have the fears that we've learned through our existence on earth right now. All of that we have within ourselves. And he talks about how the only way to really overcome fear is through knowledge. He says the basis of fear is ignorance, and the way to overcome fear is through knowledge. And so that framework I thought was really fascinating, and I thought about it a lot. And I looked at my own self when I was in Sudan, and I realized I had a tendency to be quite aggressive. It took me a while to learn to practice the idea that one must overcome their fear by submitting their fear to their Creator, and understanding that no matter what happens to us in this world, there is a hand behind the hand of what happens to us in this world. And so our ultimate fear should not be of people in this world or things in this world, but we should fear ultimately how we're going to reconcile our will, or our illusion of free will, our will with the will of the Creator. And in that, he talks about the purpose then of knowledge, and how there's material knowledge in the West, knowledge of science and so forth, and the West has reached great heights. You know, they've gone into outer space and created these cell phones that all of us are using and so forth with their knowledge base, and so it's tremendous. But that their knowledge base is in the material world, and they don't really have insight enough into the spiritual world to be able to, it's not that they don't have insight, which they don't, but they don't have the actual methodology to explore things spiritual. And so people who don't have that methodology should not try to make absolute conclusions about that realm, you see, which Western philosophers have done for a long time by dismissing religion and even coming to the conclusion that God doesn't exist. But Ustaz Mahmoud talks about that and says that that really is just part of the plan and is part of our evolutionary growth. And because we came from a time when everything we used to fear, we used to worship. So if we couldn't explain these big animals, we would worship the animals. If we couldn't explain lightning, we would worship lightning. If we found some solace in the moon or the sun, we would worship the moon and the sun. But over time, humans were able to reach enough knowledge that they understood lightning, they understood fire, they understood the moon enough not to worship the moon and fire, and so forth. And he says, but what has happened over our evolution is that we've come to the point now where our knowledge base is so great that we've even come to the point of saying that God himself doesn't exist. And that's very common in Western philosophy, and that's very common in people who are influenced by Western philosophy, which is quite dominant in the world. But the idea of the existence of God or not cannot really be concluded with any certainty based upon ideologies that are materialistic. So a materialistic measure cannot tell you what's in a spiritual realm. And so Ustaz Mahmoud talks about that in terms of our evolutionary process and reaching this point where we've even begun to deny God, but he says the contradictions that we're facing in the world are forcing us to come to grips with all of our material well-being, or all of our access to resources, or all of the money that we can acquire, or all of the friends we can make, all these things that we have accomplished as a species, which are tremendous, still have not caused us to have peace within ourselves and peace with our neighbors. And so it's almost as if we're forced now in this world to look beyond the material for explanations, and that takes you back to understanding the nature of our existence, which is essentially that we were created and we are all part of a species who was created for a purpose and has been moved along indirectly by our creator towards a specific destination. And it seems as if, and the anthropologists agree with this, I think, is that there have been many different species that have been created, and Homo sapiens sapien is just one of them. But you have like species like Homo erectus and Homo habilis and Homo ergaster and Australopithecus and on back for 1 million years. There's been species that have separated themselves from animals, but still at the same time